7th as that of 60-year-old Brian McCamish. McCamish was reported missing last September, and his body was found by a hiker north of Myrtle Drive and North Shore Drive. The cause of McCamish's death is undetermined. Anyone with information is encouraged to call WeTip at 1-800-78-CRIME or go to WeTip at www.wetip.com. You will remain anonymous. And officers responded to a multiple shots fired call on Sunday night in Menifee. Quentin Murphy, a 47-year-old, had kidnapped his ex-girlfriend from her place of employment nearby. At gunpoint, Murphy forced the woman to drive them to his house and threatened murder and suicide. The victim was able to send text messages to her family and friends for help. And once they had arrived at the scene, she ran out the door screaming. He shot them, and the shooting ended with one of the friends ramming his pickup truck into Murphy, knocking him down, injuring his leg. Murphy is currently in the hospital and will be booked into jail upon medical release. Murphy is going to be charged with kidnapping and attempted murder. A victim sustained a gunshot wound to the face and is listed in stable condition. High desert weather. We're going to have some high clouds out there again tomorrow under a mostly sunny sky with highs near 68, overnight lows into the 40s. Checking out your drive, you got a disabled vehicle in the center lane on the 91 freeway eastbound just before Lincoln Avenue and Main Street. So that's backed up. Also stop and go traffic on the I-15 between the 60 and Harupa. That is the latest with news, weather, and traffic on the station that leaves no listener behind. AM 1050 KCAA AM.
CNBC Headline News is brought to you exclusively by West Coast Auto, located at 5180 Holt Boulevard in Montclair, where you'll find the widest selection of the most pristine used automobiles in Southern California.
There are 3 reasons why West Coast Auto of Montclair has been consistently named top-rated pre-owned dealer in California. Quality, trust, savings. Every vehicle is hand-selected, extensively serviced, and reconditioned by our certified technicians, so you can feel certain that you're getting the best in-class vehicles with financing options that work for you. Like 0% down and no payments for 90 days.
Experience the best for yourself with West Coast Auto of Montclair. Online at westcoastauto.com or by calling 909-9000.
KCAA.
Welcome to Relationships 2.0. I'm Michelle Skeen. I have a very special guest today, Dr. Irvin Yalom. He is the author of many books, but he's joining me today to discuss his newest book called Creatures of a Day and Other Tales of Psychotherapy. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Yalom. Hi. Can you hear me, Dr. Yalom?
I can hear you. Can you not hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay.
It's
thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be on the show.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. This isn't the first one of your books I've read. And after reading this, I promptly ordered 2 more that I haven't read. I'm so incredibly overwhelmed by your incredible talent for telling a story and your ability to connect with people and with your client, your patients, and your readers. Tell me what inspired this book for you.
Well, I've sort of been writing books continuously, and this was the next one in line. The one I had done before that, I'd written a long novel on Spinoza, but I'm reaching an age, I'm 83 now, where I find it's more and more difficult to write novels. I think if you check the ages, you'll see that there are very few people write novels in their 80s because memory fails, and it's very hard to remember what you wrote 3 and 4 and 5 chapters ago. So it becomes a very, very lengthy process. So I feel a little bit more comfortable now in short stories.
Well, every book that you've written has even your novels have a way of, I think, capturing such incredible real life experiences. So the So you set out, like you knew far in advance that you were going to write this book and that you wanted to write a book about people trying to understand the meaning of life and people who were facing the end of their lives.
Well, no, this. It's not quite like that. I'm been a professor at Stanford for my entire adult life. Really, I'm emeritus now, but still teach there. And so I've been writing a series of books that are my primary audience, my secret audience. Every author has a secret audience, but my secret audience is the young therapist who's just starting off, and I'm trying to find different ways to teach. So these stories are, in a sense, are teaching stories. There are certain things I'm trying to teach young therapists throughout these stories. So that's the second reason why I'm writing this story. But there's certainly sufficient interest in the general audience. I'm not using any jargon. I'm not writing any sentences that I don't fully understand myself. So they're pretty available to the general public.
Although you're very intelligent, so they're not too simple. But and I understand your point as I read the book and I got to the end of the book, and I agree with the fact that you're, I don't know, maybe disheartened is a heavy word, but by the focus on diagnosing someone for the purpose of insurance, and that it's getting in the way of these really profound connections that can be made between a therapist and their patient. And it's one of the things that you do so well. And it really touched me, especially how you have such awareness about yourself and such comfort with yourself that you're able to highlight instances in which you feel like you made mistakes and where you felt like you went wrong or maybe went off course a bit, and then you recognize that and come back. And the idea that the relationship between the patient and the therapist is this nice feedback loop where we're all learning something.
Yeah, you've said quite a bit in the last couple of minutes. That I think is very important. I mean, one has to do with the therapist being very authentic, and this is not an original statement with me. It goes back a long way, but it's not the errors you make. It's really what you do with them. Yeah. And I think I need to be honest with my patients. I need to be authentic with them, and I tend to be relatively self-revealing too, because I think nothing should get in the way of the depth and genuineness of the relationship you have with the patient. So that's very high on my priority to establish that relationship.
You mentioned in the book when you first started doing rounds, I think at Stanford, that the medical students really enjoyed your talks because you weren't, they were just so different. Can you explain how your way of being was so groundbreaking at the time and why it was so important?
Well, for a long time, the model of psychotherapy was sort of based on the old Freudian notion where the analyst is a relatively invisible person. In fact, if you're lying on a couch, you don't even see the therapist, and who reveals very little of his own feelings, but makes only interpretations to the patient about their life, and especially their relationship with perhaps their patients in their early members of their earlier life. But I feel there's so much evidence now that it's the nature of the relationship that's really the most important factor. And so I try to be a real person with patients, and I do that on many different occasions in this book. If the patient has questions about myself, they want to know if I've read such and such a book or seen such and such a movie, or whether I have children. I mean, I don't see the big deal in that. I'm very willing to reveal that. In fact, there are often times that I will end the session, or towards the end of the session, I'll ask the patient, what questions do you have of me? Yeah. To see what it is they're wondering about, because I want to try and see if there's anything interfering with the integrity of our relationship and want to work on it at that point.
That's so wonderful. With these, your books are international bestsellers, and as you mentioned in this book, you are contacted frequently by people who don't even live in California, who want to fly out and have a session with you because they've been touched by one of your books. And I was so struck by how much you're able to accomplish in one session. It's almost like they've set you up to do the impossible. I'm just coming out, I can only meet with you once, or I can only have 3 sessions, or, all of these different stories that you tell. Talk about your experience with that, and if that feels like pressure for you, or if that's just an invitation for you to be even more open.
Well, lots of issues in answering that question. First of all, do keep in mind that I'm selecting a certain story. So if the first session wasn't very fruitful, well, they're not getting written about. So that's one thing. And recently I've been getting more and more used to the idea of doing shorter therapy, shorter with quotation marks, because now when I see patients, starting a few years ago, I see patients only for 1 year at max, and try to use that time as effectively as possible. But recently I have gotten used to the idea of seeing a patient for a brief period of time, patients that may come from a long ways away. And, I think for the most part I can do something to have them look at themselves in a different way. So, yes, a lot of my readers are overseas. In fact, the great majority of my readers are overseas. The books are far more popular, have been for a long time in European countries than in this country.
What do you make of that? Do you think that has to do with the fact that you're so deeply connected to philosophy, and that seems to be more, more part of the history of European countries?
That's probably part of most of the answer, I think. But it's really quite striking. A lot of the books that I've read are the other countries will outsell the U.S. by 20 to 1.
Wow.
Especially, for example, countries like Germany and Brazil and Argentina and now France. So I do have a sense of almost writing to a cosmopolitan audience. But it is true that Europeans will take philosophy in high school, and when I write a novel about a philosopher such as Nietzsche or Schopenhauer, they have much more meaning to a European audience than an American audience.
Yeah.
But I write about these philosophers because I think they've in one way or another have a lot to contribute to our field of psychotherapy that's often been overlooked.
I agree with you. My undergraduate and my first master's was in philosophy, and once I started getting into psychology, it all made a lot of, my path made sense to me. And it's one of the reasons that I was drawn to your books, and Schopenhauer's Cure and When Nietzsche Wept. So we're going to take a short break, and then we'll continue this conversation.
Okay.
You're listening to Relationships 2.0. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back.
America's wounded warriors are coming home. After serving on foreign shores, these brave men and women are returning to their families and communities. Many have wounds you can see, and many have wounds you can't see, like post-traumatic stress disorder. Now that these warriors are back home, they are ready to enter the civilian workforce. To help, Wounded Warrior Project has developed the Warriors to Work program, a career counseling service that helps warriors translate their military experience to the civilian workplace. These extraordinary men and women bring proven world-class job skills and a unique perspective on teamwork to the job. And to ensure the right warrior finds the right job, Wounded Warrior Project works with employers to find just the right match. When you hire a wounded warrior, you hire an intelligent, talented, and committed new employee. Contact Wounded Warrior Project at findwwp.org. Welcome home the brave.
Thanks for asking, but I'd rather not send you nude pictures. I'm camera shy. I already said no. Under my clothes, I'm a robot. My webcam is broken. I'm worried they'll get passed around school. I have a rash. I have nudophobia. I have lizard skin. I'm a vampire, so I don't show up in pictures anyways. Your badgering has really killed the mood.
When someone is pressuring you to do something you don't want to, how many ways can you say no before they get the message? Let us know at that'snotcool.com. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Michelle Skeen, psychologist, author, and host of Relationships 2.0. On my radio show, I interview guests who present their unique perspectives and expertise on topics that cover all aspects of relationship. If you want to improve your relationship, and let's face it, we all have room for improvement, tune in to Relationships 2.0 with Dr. Michelle Skeen. If you miss my show or you're interested in listening to past podcasts, you can go to my website, www.michelleskeen.com. Again, www.michelleskeen.com. Tune in and improve your relationships.
When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, both of my daughters were pregnant, and everything I was looking forward to turned into everything I was going to miss. First words, first steps. Today, those babies are 3. I'm with them all the time. I don't know what's next, but I know I'm here today.
A Susan G. Komen grant helped pay for Alanthea surgery, and today she's caring for her grandchildren. Help save lives. Visit IamSusanGKomen.org. A public service message from Susan G. Komen.
Welcome back to Relationships 2.0. I'm chatting with Dr. Irvin Yalom. He is the author of Creatures of a Day. It's a fabulous book, and he's written... How many books total have you written, Dr. Yalom?
Oh, I don't know.
That's a good problem to have, that you're no writer's block for you.
I wrote one book, which is a group therapy textbook, but I've written it. I'm on my 5th edition, so I don't know if I get credit for 5 books there or for 1 book.
I think you might. So rather than 14 that I'm seeing in this book, let's call it 19, right? Or 18.
Right. I'll take that. Yeah.
So are you? It was so funny to read the story about the guy who came into your office who had writer's blocks. I guess it was your first story about Paul, right?
Right.
Who had never finished his dissertation.
Yeah.
And that you have never had writer's block, that you're just always able to write. That's such a beautiful thing, and it's great work. So I suspect you're working on something right now.
I am. I'm at appropriate age now to start to think about doing a memoir. So that's what I'm doing. I'm combining it with a lot of incidents from the therapy that I offer as well, things that remind me of things in the past. So I'm struggling to find the right form, but I've been into it for the last several months.
That's terrific. There are a number of things I'd love to touch on that are in this book, if you don't mind indulging me. So let's talk about Paul. And the other thing that I love about your stories is that, I don't know, I guess that they have lots of meaning and multiple meanings, and I guess different meanings for some people than others. But what was your big takeaway from him? How did you feel like you really made a difference for him? I know sometimes you write about in the book, and of course, I understand this as a psychologist, that you don't always know how you've helped someone, and sometimes they come back into your life and reveal what was helpful, and then sometimes you never find out what was helpful. But, in the case of Alvin, we'll find out what was helpful. But what did you feel like did Paul know what he was seeking when he came to you, do you think?
Well, yeah, what you're saying is the underlying stratum of the story, which is the sense that often we are helpful to patients in ways that we can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And sometimes we find out about that, sometimes we don't. I call that story with Paul the crooked cure. And I took that term quite deliberately. It's an old term that Freud used, and what he meant by it was people who get helped by therapy that is, but not by the real cure that he thought came from therapy, which is kind of interpretation and putting things together in your early life. So, or he might call crooked cure also religion. Getting help from a belief in a divine figure who Freud believed did not really exist. So Paul wanted to see me, but my approach to trying to find out what was going on with Paul wasn't at all what he was interested in. He was interested in one thing, that he had lived this very solitary life, and he had had one major event in his life, which was that he had had a intimate relationship, mostly through writing, with a very eminent professor, and he had kept their correspondence all these years. And he wanted me to read that correspondence during his therapy hour. He says he could only afford 1 hour, and when I tried to talk to him or ask questions, he simply said, keep reading. And then towards the end, he wanted to know what my opinion was of that correspondence. And I tried to be very honest and helpful to him, saying it was a very urbane, intelligent conversation. Obviously, he looked towards your opinion with a lot of heightened intensity, and you to his, with a very close relationship. That was all he wanted. He wanted a witness to the fact that he had had this intimate relationship, and that was what he felt was the absolute center point of his life's meaning.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that was really powerful, and he needed someone else to see what he had experienced, right? In order for it to, in a way, be more real for him.
Yes, a witness to his life. That's right.
Yeah.
This was a story that the New York Times published about 3 weeks ago in their opinion section, but they condensed it by about 80%. So you got only a small bit. So I'm very glad you're mentioning this, because the story is much more than it appeared in the.
It's a beautiful story, and the other thing that you do in that story that I really love, and that of course speaks to you giving advice to young clinicians, is this idea of asking someone to describe a typical 24-hour day in their life to get a sense of what that looks like and all of that means. Can you explain why that's important and why you gather so much information from that?
Yeah, I do that with every single patient I see.
Yeah.
It's so valuable.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take very long. I mean, I often will start off just taking a look at what time they go to bed.
Right.
What time they wake up, what their sleep is like, and then that gives me an opportunity to take a look into what dreams they had last night.
Mm-hmm.
Because I already want to start to have patients be thinking about dreams, because I like to use dream material in the session, especially dreams that occur right the evening before coming to therapy. One of the things I'm really looking for is I trace them through the day. I want to look at their meals. I want to look at who they eat with. But above all, I'm really looking for how their life is peopled. What's the degree of intimacy? What's the degree of connection? Which people are closest to them? Who are their confidants? If a person lives a very, very lonely life, not only this particular day, but all days, and takes all their meals alone, and really has no people that are close to him, well, I'm worried.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a lot of work to be done, because I don't think we're gregarious creatures, and I don't think we live very entirely isolated life.
Right. So all automatically, and so just by asking him and getting his response to that, in the case of Paul, you also were able to quickly understand why this relationship was so important to him and why he was bringing it to you.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, those are the things that I focus on in that 24-hour history.
Yeah.
I also want to find out some things about their work as well, and what goes on there, and what gives them meaning in work, and is this what they really want to be doing?
Yeah. Well, you have. I guess one of the stories that you tell that also relates to that is the story about Charles and his life. Although that wasn't. I think the other story, I'm blanking on his name right now, the guy toward the end, the dermatologist, that was more about...
Yes, that was quite a long story, that is true. And those were stories, too, where I thought I was offering them one thing, but it turned out that I really, I was giving them something quite different.
Say more about that.
Well, the strange story had to do with Alvin. He came to see me for one particular reason, that he was in the terrific grief about his brother's death. And
right.
that had a lot of influence on his work, too, because he was a radiologist. And he's the one who often wrote those death sentences when he described the radiologist report and what the cancer was doing to people, knowing that was a kind of death report. And this was shaking him up tremendously.
Yeah.
And so we worked on that quite a bit, and that particular area of his discomfort really was much better. But in doing it, maybe in my 24-hour history, I was also aware of the fact that he was a very attractive young man, but he had no people in his life, and he had no woman in his life, and had never really had. And then that gradually got around to my wanting to find out more about that, and he did not want to work on that. I guess I was very pushy because I thought that's got to be important to him.
You are persistent.
I kept pushing, knocking at his door, and then eventually he gave me a hint, and the hint was that once he goes out on a date with women, it may work very well, but once the woman comes to visit his home, then they never meet again. So I began pushing about what's going on in your home. This is a very long time ago, about 30 years ago, that I had that meeting with him, and it turned out that he was a hoarder at a time before hoarding was very well known. And I was to have a meeting over his home. He wasn't happy about that, but he allowed me, and his home was impossible to walk through. It was entirely filled with newspapers, magazine racks, and things like that. But then he didn't want to meet anymore. But then I saw him again 30 years later at a funeral of an assistant that I'd been working with, and I didn't remember
Molly.
I didn't remember
Molly. Yeah.
him very well because he looked so different. But he came up to me and introduced himself, and I wondered, well, how come you're at Molly's funeral? And he said, well, don't you remember you gave me her name because she was a fixer-upper and took care of everything.
Yeah.
And although I knew nothing about it, he had been meeting with her every single week since we had stopped, and she had helped him get his home straightened, and he had a fine wife and a marriage, and so it was Molly who did the heavy lifting in that therapy. I got him prepared to meet someone like Molly who would really help him with the hoarding tendencies.
Well, but I think maybe the pivotal experience for him was that you cared enough to actually go to his home and see what was going on there, and maybe that was enough to get him to make the change that he needed to make from there. So it's amazing how powerful these connections are.
Yeah, sometimes pivotal things happen just outside the typical frame of therapy.
Yeah.
And when you somehow extend yourself in a way, or really are worried about a patient, or may call the patient after you see them to make sure they're all right, those things really tend to be terribly important.
Yeah, and you bring that up in the book too, that, there were situations where you asked if the person wanted to see you the next day and that you were available and you would make time, and that makes a big difference even if they don't take you up on the offer. We're going to take another short break and we'll continue this fascinating discussion with the amazing Dr. Irvin Yalom, author of Creatures of a Day. Stay tuned.
Hey, what's up? Holla at ya, boy. XOXOXO. You getting these texts? Question mark. Where are you? What are you doing? OMG, you are making me mad. You better text me back. I'm waiting outside your house.
Relentless, aggressive texting is like sending an angry robot to deliver your message. When does the robot become dangerous? Let us know at that'snotcool.com.
That'snotcool.com.
Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Do you tend to overreact and let your emotions rule your interactions with others? Do you become defensive or find it difficult to see things from another's point of view? Hi, I'm Michelle Skeen. You're not alone. Despite the fact that we all have to deal with people in our daily lives, many of us have difficulties with interpersonal relationships. My suggestion? Pick up a copy of the Interpersonal Problems Workbook. This book combines powerful evidence-based techniques for strengthening relationships in all areas of your life, whether it's at home or work, with a significant other, a parent, or your child. To find out more about the Interpersonal Problems Workbook, go to my website, www.michelleskeen.com. Again, www.michelleskeen.com. Pick up a copy and improve your relationships.
America's wounded warriors are coming home. After serving on foreign shores, these brave men and women are returning to their families and communities. Many have wounds you can see, and many have wounds you can't see, like post-traumatic stress disorder. Now that these warriors are back home, they are ready to enter the civilian workforce. To help, Wounded Warrior Project has developed the Warriors to Work program, a career counseling service that helps warriors translate their military experience to the civilian workplace. These extraordinary men and women bring proven world-class job skills and a unique perspective on teamwork to the job. And to ensure the right warrior finds the right job, Wounded Warrior Project works with employers to find just the right match. When you hire a wounded warrior, you hire an intelligent, talented, and committed new employee. Contact Wounded Warrior Project at findwwp.org. Welcome home the brave.
Welcome back to Relationships 2.0. I have the honor of chatting with Dr. Irvin Yalom. It will be one of the great hours of my life that I'll recount to people. We're discussing his book, Creatures of a Day. Welcome back, Dr. Yalom. I wanted to, I was reading your book and loving so much how you give so much importance to dreams. And I was thinking about how, when I was getting my doctorate, there were students in my class who were focused on dreams and really liked doing that interpretation. And it wasn't that I didn't like it. I guess maybe I didn't feel like I had any natural talent for it, but except for making like broad, general interpretations that anyone could make. But it was interesting because I fell asleep last night reading your book, not because of the content, just because it was my bedtime. And then when I woke up this morning, I began reading your book again. And then I was heading off to see clients, and I got a text from my daughter, who is a freshman in college on the East Coast. And she said, "Oh, I'm so upset. I had this dream last night." And she was telling me all about the dream and that she was really stressed about the dream. And I thought, how crazy that this has never happened, that she's telling me about a dream that she had the dream I was probably supposed to have about in preparation for my interview with you or my session with you. And I texted her back quickly because I was in a hurry, and I said, like something stupid, like try and shake it and, take a deep breath, whatever. And then when I had a moment, I thought, I'm going to try and make a little interpretation here and see if I can channel Dr. Yalom. So your work with the dreams is definitely inspiring, but also for me intimidating.
Well, I do work with dreams. I like to. They often give me a lot of information. I tell every patient when I'm meeting with them that I will be asking that. I sometimes give them a little advice about dreams. You know, that the best way to catch dreams is to try to get in the habit of asking yourself even before you open your eyes in the morning. You know, what did I dream?
Yeah.
And then without opening your eyes, again, go over the dream in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Take 60 seconds or so. Then try to write it down. It will evaporate so fast.
Yeah.
But if you can do that, they're very useful. But I think the key to what I want to say about dreams, though, is I don't think I'm after an interpretation of the dream. You can't ever really give a full interpretation of the dream. There's so much unknown. There's so much the person forgets. But often, if you just get the people to talk about the dream and then try to get their associations to it, well, who is that person in the dream? Is there anyone there that you've ever known that looks something like him? And go on from there.
Mm-hmm.
You just learn a lot about the person's life that you would not have gotten in your regular therapy, and it takes them a bit deeper. They're deeper into their life, and they're deeper into some of their more raw feelings as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just as interested in daydreams. I like to. People will have certain kind of daydreams when they're driving or walking or bicycling, and what are those dreams? And often they're repetitive dreams. And also night dreams can be very repetitive. Those are sometimes the most important ones that really will tell you important themes about the patient, things that are going on in their life that are important to them. So,
and it makes them feel like you're even trying to connect with them more, I would imagine, right?
I think so. It's a way of helping them go deeper in their life.
Yeah, it's really
some people
lovely.
Just don't dream. I had a patient who I was seeing who just absolutely struggled and was so apologetic every session, and I just decided to take some of the heat off of her. And I said, "Listen, I think we ought to forget about this. It's making you feel too uncomfortable. Just don't worry about the dreaming at all. And maybe it'll come, maybe it won't." And the very next session, she had her first dream. You know, when I told her we won't look at dreams anymore, then she had a very good complete dream.
She needed to be freed up or not feel that pressure to perform.
That's right. Yeah, she was so concerned about my judging her, and of course that itself was important.
Right.
Why so much concern? You know, we are kind of instruments. Each of us. We may say 40 people during the week or so, and some people look at us as great judges. You know, they're judging them in some way. Some people may look at us as being very supportive. Some people may be very suspicious of us, etc. But the thing is that I'm the same person in all of these things. And if I know myself well enough, you know, I can watch myself pretty clear. And yet people see me in very different ways. And why is that? Well, it's got to be related to the fact that people have different inner worlds. And therefore we can focus on the relationship because it's a way into the inner world of the person.
So you have, in one of your stories, I think is it Jared who's so concerned with what you think of him?
I think it's Jared. Yeah, you know, the names are all made up, of course. But yes.
Right.
That's the title story.
Right. Creatures of a Day. Talk about that, and also kind of the specific meaning to him, but kind of the bigger meaning for everyone, and how you were able to get him in touch with why he shouldn't care as much about that.
Yeah, Jared was an interesting character. I had been seeing him for a few months, and then one day he comes to my office and says he has a confession. And he's only telling me this because he thinks it's going to come out anyway, because he thinks his couples therapist is going to call me. The confession is...
Oh, yeah. You're Patricia, right?
Yeah. The confession is that though he's living with this one woman and we'd been talking about her, the truth is there's another woman that also thought he was going to marry her. And he was very embarrassed about that. And so naturally, I began to look at this curious phenomenon. And here he is spending this time with me, paying me, and yet concealing important information. What sense does that make? Well, and how does he explain that? And then he talked about how important it was to him that I think well of him, and then I have a certain image of him in my mind, not taking into account really that it may be a false image because he's not giving me the full information. So we went on from there, and I decided I suddenly had a thought of something I had read. I was reading at that time. I was reading the book of Marcus Aurelius, and there was a section in Marcus Aurelius, and that's where the title of the book comes from. He's saying that we are but creatures of a day, that we're very evanescent, that we're transitory, we vanish, and I'm going to vanish. And yet he bases so much on what this image of him in my mind, well, my mind will be dust and everything. Why base his life on that so much? So I did a strange thing. I suggested, why don't you read Marcus Aurelius and see? And that's how the story evolved. That's how the title story of this evolved. Later on that day, I saw a different patient, and he had a different kind of problem. The problem was that he was doing a job that he hated, but he had to do to support his family and
That's right,
his
Andrew.
parents. And I was reminded once again of Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman emperor, but was appointed to be the Roman emperor. He didn't want to be. He really wanted to be a philosopher. And so he was forced into a lifestyle that he hadn't really chosen. So I told him that maybe he should read some things by Marcus Aurelius, too. So the same day I told two people to read Marcus Aurelius, and it was very interesting because each of them took something very different out of Marcus Aurelius. Not what I expected they'd take, but something quite different.
Yeah.
And Marcus Aurelius is an absolutely extraordinary guide for life. He was one of the early Roman emperors and wrote down his meditations every morning, and then they're brimming with wisdom and good counsel.
And so one of the big questions was who was he writing that for?
Right. So we think probably that's a question that a lot of people have been thinking about. We think probably that he was writing that from his better self, trying to remind himself of his better self and trying to maintain a thoughtful and calm type of life. One of his phrases that I also use with one of my patients that was very useful, he says that the best thing you can do with an enemy is not to imitate him, not to be like him. And that throws a whole new light on your enemy. Rather than taking revenge, getting back somehow, is be different to yourself. Don't be like him in a sense. And that turned to be a very useful piece of information for one of my patients.
Right. And then the other thing was if you're, I mean, I'm saying it in a, less eloquent way, but if you're behaving well, then you shouldn't care what other people think, right? If you're not doing anything harmful to anyone, then someone else's opinion, like in the case of Jared, he shouldn't care what you think of him right?
Right. If you're living a moral life, that you can't be harmed by anyone.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot lately about how nice it would be to have a reminder, just one of those, something that every morning is kind of, you're getting in touch, reattaching to, or getting in touch with the things that are important to you, your values, what brings meaning, just to kind of set the course for the day. And then when I was reading your story about Marcus Aurelius, I was touched by the fact that sounds like that's exactly what he was doing, only obviously in, a very profound way, and in a way that obviously, impacted and moved a lot of people, but it seems to be a great exercise.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to keep reminding yourself things like that. Martin Seligman, who's one of the founders of a more positive psychology, he likes to tell his clients to think of 3 blessings they've had that day before they go to sleep that night. He feels that's a very good way to end the day. And I think that's quite a wonderful exercise.
Yeah. And, let's talk again about looking at positive aspects instead of you're trying to communicate with young therapists, um, and hoping that you can impact them so that they won't focus so much on um, the um, the diagnosis and pathologizing people and focusing on people's deficits. Or I feel like your work, it reminded me of the idea of looking for and bringing awareness to the source of suffering to deal with that, as opposed to, addressing a specific diagnosis.
I agree with that. I'm very troubled by what the economics is doing to our field, where you have to force people into various diagnoses. I never make diagnosis on anyone. It usually gets in the way rather than helps. And this new diagnostic manual is really an atrocity, I think, to the field. So I don't use that.
Yeah.
I wrote one story, which was called Three Cries, which really demonstrates how
I love that.
Making a diagnosis can get in the way of therapy. But I know young therapists are up against it. They have to get paid by insurance companies. They have to do a certain kind of therapy. They don't get trained in how to relate to people, often in their training programs. Sometimes they have to get that afterwards. Too often they're trained to treat people by a manual and have them do certain homework each time. This new approach called cognitive behavioral therapy, which I feel is helpful for some people sometime, but that being the only arrow in your sling, the only way you know how to work with people is a very unfortunate thing. You've got to be able to relate to people on deep levels.
I agree. I mean, it could be the most important relationship in their life, and I'm sure that you've had so many patients in which you were the most important relationship in their life. I'm thinking about, first of all, I would love for you to tell the story about Billy and how that diagnosis for your client, what was her name? I'm sorry, remember Billy? Oh, Helena. How that just totally changed how she viewed their relationship.
Right. This was a story of a woman who had this wonderful relationship with this young man. They had lived together. He was gay. They had and she was not. She got into a rather bourgeois marriage, but in her younger days, she and he lived together in Brooklyn. They traveled all through South America on a motorcycle, and it was the great moments of her life. And now she had gotten trained to be a psychologist, and now she was looking back on that relationship, and suddenly came to the conclusion: oh my God, Billy was manic. He was bipolar, and she had given him a diagnosis. And I felt that this was an atrocity, something that was really harmful to these wonderful memories that she had of him, as then he had died and she was grieving him. So my effort was to try and bring Billy back into his former position of a rich and wonderful friend that she'd had, rather than he's nothing but a manic. Which hurt both of their experiences. But one thing I want to say, that when you commented before about the importance of the relationship with a therapist, keep in mind that if you have a very intimate relationship with a therapist, that gets into your mind as a kind of an internal reference point that can tell you that you're capable of having a good relationship with other people, and can be a way of inspiring you and facilitating the ways that you can develop closer relationships in your life. You know you could do it. Someone you liked and respected was able to have a very close relationship to you.
Yeah. It's so true, and it can change that internal working model of what a relationship is, and I do think it's really powerful. I know that happened for me personally with my therapist, who was woman in her maybe 70s at the time, and it was very powerful. One of the stories that I'd like to get to before we run out of time is the homage to Ellie.
Right.
And the story is so beautiful about her, but it's so beautiful about you. And I respect your honesty so much. And like you said, it's not the errors that you make or even the interpretations. I love that, you had to go back and rethink everything that had gone on between you and Ellie, or at least portions of it. Can you talk about your time with her and how that came about?
Well, Ellie was a patient who I'd seen who had advanced cancer. I'm almost always seeing some patient with cancer in my practice. I went for 10 years where I was working very exclusively almost with patients with cancer to learn much more about death and how it affects us and how we therapists can help. So Ellie was coming to me with an advanced cancer, and we only met for a few times. She was sending me letters, and rather than I was seeing her, she had no money, and I was seeing her with the stipulation that we each write a summary of our sessions and send it to the other. It was a way of helping her write, helping me write. I did that once before with a patient 40 years ago called Every Day Gets a Little Closer. It's where our entire therapy is. We have our summaries that each of us wrote after each session. So I wanted to do something like that with Ellie.
Yeah.
But she really wrote about her cancer and about her dying in an extraordinarily lucid, touching, feelingful way. And there was so much in that. And I was aware that I was working on a novel at that time, just finishing it up. Had gone to Hawaii for a month's writing retreat. And she sent me a letter saying that she had planned now to end her life by stopping eating and drinking. It's kind of voluntary stopping and eating and drinking that some people will use to end their life. It's a process that will take sometimes up to 10 days, but it's not a painful process.
It's painful or not painful?
It's not a painful process.
It's not a painful process. Okay.
Anyway, but as I began to reread her letters, I really realized at that point that I hadn't really let them all in the first time she sent them to me. I was so much moved by reading them the second time. And I think that's something that therapists need to keep in mind, that we often will protect ourselves. And if we see a number of patients who have that, we almost must do that. Oncologists as well who do that. You can't let yourself feel so much that you're overwhelmed and become, not as useful to your other patients. But it woke me up a little bit that I had kept myself at a certain distance from Ellie. And now when I really listened to her words that I had not fully read last time, I was tremendously moved by that.
It was...
Ellie's the only patient in that book who I'm using the real name. When I asked her for permission to write this story, as I do with every patient, she gave me one stipulation that I use her real name rather than a made-up name. So she wanted her message to get out, and I'm writing her message out for others.
Well, it's a beautiful message, and I thought it was one of the things that I thought was interesting is how easy it is to kind of fall into the trap of looking at the other person as the reason that the close attachment isn't happened. Like you had imagined that you two didn't have a close attachment, and then when you reread what she had written, you realized that she was so attached to you.
Yes,
and you were able to go to that dark place with her, that you were able to stare her in the eyes and not look away, that you didn't flinch in the face of her death. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And that must have just felt so wonderful when you reread that, to realize what an amazing impact you had on her remaining days.
Yeah, I just got a letter from her brother who read the book. I'd sent him the book. He had come to visit her, stay with her at the end of her life, and he was moved by the story as well. So I feel really good about that.
Oh, that's beautiful.
How would feel about it.
That's so wonderful. Well, they're amazing stories, and I'm now back on a Dr. Irvin Yalom kick, and I have my night table is stacked with your books. Next up is, I didn't read the Spinoza one, so I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, the Spinoza Problem.
Yeah. And there's a book of stories called Mama and the Meaning of Life, too, that wasn't quite as popular as that other book I wrote called Love's Executioner, but a couple of my favorite stories are in that book, so take a look at that one.
I'll have to grab that one too, and I want to welcome you back anytime. And this is just such a treat for me. And we're both in the Bay Area. I hope I get to bump into you sometime. I'm in San Francisco, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy patient and writing schedule. And also I want to say I love the dedication to your wife of 60 years. That is spectacular.
Yep, we met when we were 15. Long time ago.
That's amazing. That is beautiful. Is there anything that, I guess I want to ask you, as you wrote these stories and now reading them in their finished stages, if there are things that come up for you in particular about that can give people comfort as they kind of knowingly face the end of life, whether it's that they're dealing with terminal illness or they're 100 years old.
Well, I think maybe the important message, the thread that runs throughout several of the stories, is the whole question of regrets and what kind of regrets you have about your life. And I work with patients and I ask them about the regrets they have. I asked Ellie, the dying patient, about her regrets. And then you begin to wonder about if we were to meet a year from now or 2 years from now, what new regrets would have built up?
Yeah.
And then maybe another question that allows us to have a lot of therapeutic crunch in therapy is there some way that you can live a regret-free life?
Yeah.
Where you're living in a way that you're not going to be regretting this a year or two from now. And I feel like that's a marker running through several of the stories.
It is. It definitely is. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry
welcome.
We've run out of time.
All right.
Again, it's Dr. Irvin Yalom. The book is Creatures of a Day, but get all of his books. They're fabulous.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And now, it's time for the latest in news from KCAA, CNBC Business News, brought to you by West Coast Auto.
You're on board KCAA's Inland Talk Express. KCAA, Loma Linda, 1050 AM, the station that leaves no listener behind.
I'm Perry Apollo, CNBC Radio. Stocks couldn't hold on to the gains they enjoyed for most of the day today, breaking a 2-day win streak. Investors reining things in at the close in advance of the kickoff of earnings season tomorrow. The Dow lost 5 points. The Nasdaq was down 7. The S&P 500 lower by 4. One big winner, Axalta Coating Systems, up almost 10% on news of a 20 million share purchase by Warren Buffett. Oil prices are still on the rise. Crude closed up another 3% today, just under $54